Hi, Michelle. Video. Let me see if I can see you. Hi, Michelle. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Hi.
All right. Let me invite you to video one more time. See if you can accept that. Okay. Awesome. There's Susan.
Hi.
All right. Did you get the request, Michelle?
I don't think so. I don't see it.
Invite to video. Okay. I just invited her to video, Susan. I'm not sure if you want to give it a go.
Okay, I can try that too.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you for being here, Michelle, for your patience.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I just invited you to video as well, so you should see that coming through. You just have to accept.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know what? I wonder if I should go out and back in again.
Yeah, you can try that. See if that works.
No worries.
Let's see here. Oops.
Okay, let's try again. Oh, yay!
There she is.
All right.
Made it.
There we go.
Fantastic.
All right. Okay, well, it's 4:00. It's past 4:00. So I think that I'll go ahead and start so we can be respectful of everyone's time. Michelle, you can hear me, right? We're good?
Yes, I can hear you. Perfect.
Perfect. Okay, so hi Firesiders, welcome to Adventures by the Book, where it's our mission to connect people and communities through the superpower of books. I'm your host, Amber Reinhart, and I'm here today too with Susan McBeth, and together we're going to be co-hosting part 3 of our Thankful for Reading Fireside series, and today we are going to be talking to Michelle Cox about her novel, A Spying Eye, and I actually have a copy right here.
That's awesome. Yay!
This lovely cover. I know. It was so fun to read too. I can't wait to dive into that. So today's Fireside Chat, as a reminder, is part 3 of a 5-part series. And each week, Susan and I will be talking to a different author about a different book, to get ready into the holiday spirit. And today's chat is about 45 minutes. And today's conversation with Michelle is intended as, a conversation for the audience to be able to jump on stage as well. We want everyone interacting. So if you want to ask Michelle a question at any point or jump on stage, please feel free to do so. And we're more than happy to have you up. And did you know that if you were in the live virtual audience, you can broadcast this conversation live on our own social media channels by going to the round circle in the bottom left corner of your screen. You can click on the globe icon to broadcast. So let's see if anyone can do that really quick. Debbie, thank you so much for broadcasting. You'll see that globe icon, and there's a link. You can even share this with some friends. So thank you for doing that. And then again, if you haven't already, please go to our website at adventuresbythebook.com to purchase your copy of A Spying Eye. It is such a good book. It's a great read. So I highly recommend that. And without further ado, I think we should get started. So Michelle Cox is the author of the multiple award-winning Henrietta and Inspector Howard series, as well as Novel Notes of Local Lore, a weekly blog dedicated to Chicago's forgotten residents. Her books have been praised by Kirkus, Library Journal, Publishers Weekly, Booklist, and many others. In her 6th book of the series, A Spying Eye, Clive and Henrietta return to Europe in an attempt to resurrect their failed honeymoon. While in London, they are approached by their old friend, Inspector John Hartle, who convinces them to search for the missing panel of the Ghent altarpiece, a famous Renaissance painting of which Hitler's top men are also in pursuit. So again, we have a bit of a rom-com, mystery, some, suspense, historical novel. Everything is here in this series. So highly recommend. Everyone will love it. And welcome, Michelle. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, thanks for having me. Thanks for that nice intro. That was awesome.
Yes, and I actually, before we started, I just wanted to say I really enjoyed reading this book. Um,
Thank you.
I'm sure you hear this often, but you are a fantastic writer. Anyone who reads your work will know how much effort and hard work and research went into these books because your novels are rich with research. The imagery was stunning. You know, I felt like I was actually there in the 1930s. And your characters, they just jump right off the page. They have a life of their own. So just, you know, effortless dialogue. And it was just such a treat to read. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Yes. And we're going to get started with a question that we always like to start with, which is before you became a successful writer, you know, can you talk a little bit about where you grew up, your first exposure to books, and how you came to become a reader and a writer? So just a little bit of background.
Okay. Yeah, so I grew up in a very small town of like 1,900 people, right on the Illinois-Iowa border. So I grew up on a farm. And, I think of course, my mom always read a lot to us, but I think a big influence was the librarian at my school, Sister Madeline. And she was so old that she actually taught my grandfather. So she taught my grandfather, she taught my father, and then she taught me. So, but by the time I was at the school, she was relegated to the library. But she was this fantastic person, and she was so full of life and so bubbly, and she loved books so much, and you just couldn't help but love books too when you were around her. She just sort of exuded that. And so she kind of saw in me early on that I really loved books. And so she would pull me aside at the end of the school year and she would let me take as many books from the school library as I could carry. I didn't have to check them out or anything like that. She trusted me that I would bring them all back. And so every year it was this challenge to see how many books I could carry home on the bus. So I think that's kind of where it all started.
Oh my goodness. That sounds like, well, a dream for me. So that's so fun that you had
Right.
that inspiration.
Can I interrupt you guys for a minute? Because Michelle disappeared from my screen and I texted somebody and they can't see her either. So
That's
I'm
weird.
going to, I'm going to remove you from the video. Oh,
It's weird
you are
because
removed.
I
Let me
can't see
invite you
Susan.
back. Yeah, I removed myself because,
Oh, you did.
yeah. But I just invited you again, Michelle. Let's try this again. Because we're talking to Amber and a blank screen.
It's okay.
You're just getting my voice. Yeah.
You do not
Yeah.
see an invite to join you on stage. Okay, let's do this again. Let's remove you from the stage and invite you again. Let's try this again. Sorry, ladies.
No worries. We're good with troubleshooting. You know, it's the age of COVID, so
Yeah.
we're all
Okay,
understanding.
inviting you back up, Michelle.
Yay!
There she is.
Oh, I
Okay.
see you now.
All right.
Okay.
Very good. Go ahead.
Okay. No problem.
Yay.
I see a bookshelf behind you, so very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so another thing that I want to ask you, just some more background, is all the fields of interest that you had before you became a writer. Was there any job or, you know, type of life experience that you had that influenced your writing?
I would say, so I was an English major, English lit major. And I didn't really come to that until, the second half of college. I kind of toyed with being a writer, but I was afraid to do it. And I really love science as well. So I decided that, going the pre-med route would be easier than becoming a writer. And in some ways, now that I'm on the writer path, I'm like, maybe I was right, because this is a tough business. But yeah, I still didn't have the courage though to do like a creative writing degree. So I did English lit, and then I graduated. And what do you do with an English degree? So I worked for a while at a graphic arts firm, and that was like really awful and horrible. And so then I started working at this nursing home, and that was probably the biggest influence on me becoming a writer. So at first I was the admissions director, and I failed miserably at that because I didn't know that I was supposed to be like ambulance chasing and like trying to fill beds. Like that was my job. And instead, I just wanted to walk around the nursing home and talk to everybody and like get their stories. And so they switched me into social service, long story short. And that was my dream job, because then it was my job to go around and interview these people and, take down their stories. And so that has formed the basis of my blog, 20, 30 years later. And also that is where I get a lot of my ideas for stories. So Henrietta, for example, was based on a woman that I met there. And she had this amazing life in Chicago. And so a lot of what happens in actually book 1 of the series, A Girl Like You, really did happen. And of course, I made up the murder and the inspector and stuff like that. But a lot of it is true. It really did happen. So I cherish my time there. I'm saving the very, very best stories that I collected for novels. But yeah, it was very influential.
Oh, so actually, my next question had to do with your job there and bringing that up. So you have a blog or like a series of articles on your website called Novel Notes of Local Lore. And I was scrolling through a couple of them, and they are all so fascinating and so interesting. But I was wondering if you could give the audience just like one quick little synopsis of one that comes to mind, just because they're so fascinating. And clearly, you have a niche for like historical research. So
Yeah, and that's why I just love stories about the past. And I'm trying to think of like a really good one. There was, some of them. What's so great about these stories is that they are just ordinary people, and yet if you read them, what they went through and what they had to deal with, it was just amazing. And then, but they just lived their lives, and then they ended up in this nursing home, and unless you sat and talked with them, you would never have gotten those stories. So like there's one where it's super, super tragic. It just is this woman who, they were in Poland and they were invaded, and they were all taken to like a Siberian like camp where they were, had to like chop down trees, and she would forage in the woods for like stray mushrooms, because all they got literally was bread and water. And so like one of the daughters escaped, and she joined the Italian resistance. And then, it was just like this gigantic saga of how they finally made it to America, and they all lived like multi-generations in this one house in Chicago. And this woman, just no matter, she had lost a child in the camp, she had lost her husband, and yet she had this energy and this positivity that stayed with her for her entire life. So her children were always saying, how she loved having people over, she loved cooking for people, she just loved life. And that type of story fascinates me, because if anybody had a right to be bitter and angry, and it would be her. But instead, she came through all of this, it's still loving life and still, loving people. And I just think that is such a great inspiration. So that's just one that comes to mind, but there's many, many, many.
I love that. And I think that it's so special that you make sure they're not forgotten. Especially, I read the one, Child Bride, and that one was really, that one I couldn't believe. She was 15 and she got married. So, but anyway, thank you for sharing that. I don't want to, forget about why we're here, which is A Spying Eye. So I think we should dive into that. So Michelle, can you give the audience some background on the relationship between this book 6 in the series, and the rest of the books in the series? And so just so the audience knows, do they need to read book 1 before they read book 6? And is there any other context you want to highlight?
You know what? I've tried to write them so that you don't need to start at book 1. And I've heard from many, many, many readers and reviewers that it does read as a standalone, that there's enough in there to kind of get the background, the backstory. But most people suggest that you start at the beginning, because this is a series. It's not your typical mystery series where you have the same stock characters that just solve a different mystery every time. This is really about character development, and there's a lot by book 6, as you know, there's a lot of subplots going on, and you can understand what's going on if you just step into the world in book 6, but you really have a deeper appreciation and understanding of what's going on if you start at the beginning. So yeah, I mean, the quick context is that it's Henrietta is from a very impoverished family. Her father killed himself during the Great Depression. Her mom is clinically depressed. She has many brothers and sisters that she has to sort of provide for. Clive Howard is the aloof inspector, Chicago inspector. And he has been through World War I. He has his own battle scars, and he has sort of gone through a lot and has sworn off, emotion or women or anything like that. So they end up, Henrietta is working on a case, or working at a dance hall. Her boss is murdered, and the two meet during the investigation. And that kind of starts the whole series off, their relationship. And when I was writing this book, the book 1, I didn't think that this was going to be a series. If I had, I would have set it up a little bit differently, because people say that you should write what you would like to read. And I didn't really necessarily want to write this big series about a cop and his wife in Chicago, like dealing with the mob or something like that. I felt like that had already kind of been done before. And I really love things like, lots of like period drama, historical fiction. I would love to read like a Downton Abbey meets like Miss Fisher's murder mysteries. So I'm like, I have to change the story a little bit. So somebody had to have a secret background, and Clive volunteered to be the heir to this really large estate in Winnetka in the north suburbs. And so that creates another whole level of drama that kind of permeates through the rest of the series about, Henrietta not being good enough, or does she even want this kind of a life, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a little bit of context.
Well, I have a question later, more on Henrietta and Clive. And side note, I have a crush on Clive. I just really love him in this book. So
do I, and I'm the
he's just, yes, his banter is very sweet. So my next question is, I want to highlight to the audience, first of all, that how truly unique this book is. So I have read, through reviews and just online, that this series combines the elegance of Downtown Abbey, the traditions of Pride and Prejudice, the sexiness of Bridgerton, and the suspense of a Sherlock Holmes mystery novel. So picture all of that in one, and that's what this book is, 100%. So Michelle, can you talk a little bit about how you went about creating this series with all these different genres in one? Did you have that in mind when you started, or did you find it along the way? And what do you see your book as? Mystery, romance, historical?
Those are great questions. Yeah, it's funny because, like I said before, I wanted to write something that I would like to read. And what I would like to read kind of incorporates all of those things. But I didn't realize that, if I were starting all over again, I don't know if I would do it this way, because if I'm planning on starting a new series at some point, and I really want to try to like stay in one lane, because it's easier to sell your book or market your book. I mean, to be perfectly honest, if it's, straight up mystery or straight up romance. And mine, really, as you said, mixes everything together. That's what I love. But it's a little bit harder, to find the perfect audience for that, because there are a lot of people out there who like that, but it's hard to find those people when your book is a little bit of everything. So that's a little bit tricky. Just although my new series, again, I'm already genre bending. I'm like, well, it's going to be historical, but it might be kind of fantasy too. And I'm like, see, there you go again. You just can't control it. So yeah.
Okay, you have to
I
define
don't
it
know.
all. It's all good.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I don't know. The people who like these books really like them. So that's cool.
Well, I mean, you read the first 2 pages and you realize how much you put into these books. And I'm just talking like straight up historical research that went into it. This took a lot of time. But then you add on top of that the elements of the chemistry between the characters and how they're real people with real lives. It's a very unique book. And so speaking of romance, I want to kind of touch back more on one of our two main characters, Henrietta and Clive. And so I think one of the main reasons why this series gets compared to Pride and Prejudice or Bridgerton is because of their chemistry. So we have Henrietta, who comes, as you said, from an impoverished background in Chicago. And then you have her husband, detective and aristocrat Clive Howard, who I love. And these two have undeniable chemistry, and it's their banter and their conversations that make them jump off the page and seem so real. And I love the chapters with them together. They fly by for me. But perhaps what I loved most about them was how, even though this is in the 1930s, I think Clive really sees Henrietta as almost his intellectual equal. Even though women didn't have the same say back then, he even has a line where he says, there are no secrets between us, and we are quite of one mind. And so I really loved that. And so, Michelle, my long-winded question to you is, what inspired you to make them work? And what do you think gives them that spark and makes them work so well together?
Well, I think that it's hard to write, I think, a convincing female character from the past. So you have to make her realistic, but at the same time, you want her to be relatable to a modern reader. So I think that that's a really fine line. And I felt like I had a little bit of license to do that, to make Henrietta as independent as she appears in the book, because this goes back to the woman that I based her character on. She had this amazing life in Chicago, and one of the things about her that just really stood out, apparently she was this very beautiful, voluptuous woman, just like I've made Henrietta. And so even though it was the Depression, she never had a problem getting a job. So, you have all these stories of like people lined up around the block, for a job. She never had a problem getting a job, I think, because she was so beautiful. Her problem was keeping the job. So she was always being felt up in the back room, and she would slap whoever it was, and then she would be instantly fired. And I just thought, you know what, that takes so much courage to do that in that environment in the Great Depression when people were begging for jobs. So, but it was so important for her to maintain her virtue. So I just thought, I really want to try to craft a character that that encapsulates that. So I feel like she is sort of a little bit of a modern woman, but she also has to kind of exist within those confines. And so you're coming into the series at book 6, where Clive is accepting her, or trying very hard to accept her. But a lot of the books ahead of this in the series, um that's one of their big sticking points, is that at the very beginning, Clive really does not want her to be part of this, investigations or anything like that. He just wants her to sit in the big estate and just, play bridge with his mom. And she's like, that's not who I am. And that's not why you married me. That's not why you're attracted to me. So anyway, that's like a whole like drama that goes on between them through the whole series. And I think maybe it was subconscious, but I really love the Pride and Prejudice film version of with Matthew McFadden and Keira Knightley. I know there's big Earth fans, but I'm a fan of Matthew McFadden. So to me, he's like the perfect Clive. And so I really I think envisioned a lot of that sexual tension and a lot of their sort of banter. I think it was very much inspired by that version of Pride and Prejudice.
Oh, I love that. And some of my favorite scenes were the ones where Henrietta was getting pursued by another male, and then Clive was getting jealous, or like coming in to try to like make his show this is my wife. I really loved that. And then the reader does get hints that Henrietta isn't perfect, and she does have stuff she's struggling with, like I believe a miscarriage is what happened in a previous book. And so she's struggling, but they're both realize that, and they're both trying to challenge each other and make each other better. So I appreciated the relationship, and I really love Clive, and I think everyone else will. So please get this book and get the rest of the series. I promise you won't regret it. Okay, so on to our next question. As I mentioned earlier, your books are rich in historical research, so much so that you have brought the 1930s to life. I love how every detail matched this era to a T, from hints of World War II and Hitler rising to power, to even the songs you mentioned that are playing at the balls, such as Lovely to Look At or Your Hit Parade. So on top of all of this, your book spans across different geographical locations, from Chicago to Strasbourg, France. So a lot is going on here. You have the historical time period that you're trying to wrestle with, but then you also have, geographical locations changing between characters. What is the research process like for you, and how do you manage all of this? Because there's just so much that goes into this book.
Thanks. Yeah. It's been tricky, but I do think that a lot of it, because the first book is really just set in Chicago, and it kind of goes from there. And like the character of Elsie, who forms like such a big subplot, she was never supposed to be anything more than just a bit character. And as the series has gone along, she's really grown. And a lot of readers write to me and say that they love the Elsie storyline as much as the Henrietta Clive storyline. So I'm like, wow, I think she's about to like spin herself off. But so I think I was able to do a lot of the research as the series has gone along. However, I will say that I think I've watched every period drama ever made, and I read, all the classic novels until I was like 40, when I had a, brain meltdown after my third kid. And I'm like, what am I doing? I stopped reading Pride and Prejudice. So I switched to like historical fiction as the next best thing. But I'm just a person that collects a lot of these details. But it wasn't until, so a lot of it wasn't super heavy duty research, because I kind of already knew a lot of this stuff. And by book, I think it's book 4 was really interesting, because it's, it involves my alma mater, Mundelein College, right when it was built. So that was fun to do some research on that. Book 5 centers around a very awful real life insane asylum in Chicago. So I did do some extensive research on that. And then, of course, for this book, I did a lot of research on the Ghent altarpiece, which forms this sort of mystery. And that's just so fascinating. Normally, I'm not the type of author that does like a year of deep dive research. I'm just not that writer, because I feel like if you do too much research, or if I do, it just gets in the way of the story. I just want to tell the story. So it's really, really, really more about these characters. And then I go back and add in whatever, what car would Clive have driven when he was in Paris? I'll look that up, all of that up later.
Mm-hmm.
I did, however, have to do some research ahead of time on the Ghent altarpiece, because I wasn't really sure what the mystery was going to be. I knew they were going to go back to Europe, but I didn't know what. I'd already done The Murdered Man in the English Village in book 3. So I'm like, what about stolen art? So I quickly Googled stolen art, 1930s Europe, and Ghent altarpiece popped up. And the more I read about it, the more I'm like, oh my God, this is perfect. It's just because, as I say in the author's note at the end of the book, this is an open case. There's a panel of this painting that has never been recovered, and that's perfect, because then there's so much wiggle room about what could have happened to it. Henry and Clive could have come upon it. So there was so many fascinating aspects about this painting that I just knew I had to use it.
You stole my next question, because I was going to ask you what went into the Ghent altarpiece, and I was actually going to read a portion of your author's note in the back of the book, because I really like what you said at the opening paragraph, and everyone can read this if they purchase the book at our website at adventuresbythebook.com. But I will just read a little blurb about the Ghent altarpiece, because like you said, Michelle, it really is the perfect element of mystery to add to the story, because it's a real life mystery. So already it's intriguing. We don't know really in real life what happened. So adding that to the book was, just perfect. So I'll read a tiny little portion. Michelle wrote, the Ghent altarpiece is a real work of art painted in 1432 by Jan and Hubert van Eyck, and one of its panels, The Just Judges, really was stolen from St. Bavo's Cathedral, Belgium, on April 10th, 1934. The supposed thief, I'm going to butcher this name, so I'm sorry, Arsene Gautier, my bad, was caught 7 months later. The panel, however, was never recovered, and it remains a mystery to this day. So I loved that you added that as the mystery, but on top of that, we had the suspense and tension of Hitler is searching for it, so it's almost like a race. And I just thought that was brilliant to add to the book. So thank you for doing all that research and for adding that. Beautiful. And my question on the Ghent altarpiece was, what do you think actually happened to it in real life?
I actually bought, which I normally don't buy and read books just to research things, like I said, because it's it's too involved, and then you go down a rabbit hole. But I couldn't help it in this case. I had to buy this book. And I do think that there was some sort of government entity that stole it because they knew Hitler was going to take the whole thing. And there's a story about in the 70s, I think there was a tip. And so they x-rayed the whole cathedral to a depth of 10 meters, because I think based on what this guy says in this book is that it was hidden in the cathedral, which is one of the theories. It was hidden in a secret compartment, because when they opened this one secret compartment, there was an outline in the dust, the exact shape that the panel would have been. So from there, who knows where it went after that point? I don't know. It's so fascinating. As I've said, a whole entire novel could be written just about that theft on April 10th, 1934. So many weird things happened that are have not yet been explained. So yeah, there was a robbery across the street that night at a cheese shop. And so when the police arrived in the morning, they did not cordon off the cathedral. So they let people in and destroyed any evidence. And in the meantime, they went across the street and investigated the cheese shop theft. So right there, something doesn't add up about this whole thing. So I think it was definitely done on purpose by a hidden entity bent on preventing Hitler from getting it. And then after that, who knows?
Yeah. Well, I had a family dinner the other night, and I was talking about your book to my parents, and I was talking about the Ghent altarpiece with my dad, and he just fell down rabbit holes after dinner. Just, what happened to it? Where is it? And I was like, I don't know. But I loved that. It's a great thing to think about. And then my last question before I pass the mic off to Susan is, where do you see Clive and Henrietta heading next? Any plans for them?
Yeah, so I am working on edits for book 7, and the working title is called A Haunting at Linley. Ooh. So yeah, so you think that, at the end of book 6 that they're going to just explore Paris and have a good time and whatever, but they end up getting a telegram from Wallace, who's the English cousin, saying, can you come back to the UK because my father is dying and blah, blah, blah. So they get back there, and of course, book 7 is the most Agatha Christie of all of the books. So it's the English Manor. There's a dead body, and you have all of these guests who could have done it. And so it's the end of the series, unfortunately. That's the last book. I know.
Think
Yeah.
about them, like they're so real. So I'm, as an author that has created 6 and going on 7 books with these characters, it's like a sweet sorrow to part with them. So thank you for bringing them to life. And I'm so excited to have you back on here for the last talk with book 7. So I'm going to pass the mic over. Yes, I'm going to pass the mic over to Susan, and she can ask a couple of questions.
Great. Okay.
Hi. You know what? I'm not going to invite myself up on video because I'm worried it's going to boot Michelle off again, and I don't want to do that. So I'll just do it from afar. First of all, I want to commend Amber on the interview, because I know we were talking earlier about how densely packed your book is with so many topics and things to discuss. And I thought you did a great job in kind of winnowing it down and the salient points and making it interesting. Exactly. So good job, Amber. So Michelle, your 7th and final one is coming up next. So what made you decide this is it? This is the final one?
Well, it's complicated. I thought that Clive and Henrietta were going to go on forever. I had no intention really of ending this, but I'm published with She Writes Press, and I love them. I think that they are a fantastic press. I have nothing but great things to say about them. However, they are a hybrid, and I was thinking that I wanted to take the series into my own hands, and because I own the rights, and I wanted to start self-publishing them because, I mean, not to look too far behind the curtain, but if I am able to self-publish them, then I can control the marketing a lot more and control the advertising. So that was kind of going to be my intent. And they were like, no, please stay with us for one last book, which was book 6. And I'm like, well, I cannot possibly end the series with book 6. There's too many loose ends. So they said, all right, why don't you write a book 7 with us, and then, do what you want to do. And I went through kind of a grieving period for these characters because they really are so real for me. So my secret workaround is that I'm not really going to be done with Clive and Henrietta. I mean, I'm going to be done with this series with She Writes Press, but I would like to either do some spin-offs, or I would like to do a subscription service, like a Patreon service, where I do just, stories for Patreon subscribers. Or I'd like to start the series up 10 years later. So now it's the 1940s, and they're 10 years older, and we see where they are, and I start it all over again. So I've got all of that in my mind, and I've got Melody Merriweather, I think, is going to spin off into her own series. And then I really do want to write this historical fantasy series. So I've kind of got a lot on my plate.
You definitely do. But the most important question for Amber is, Clive's not going anywhere, is he?
No, he isn't. He's essential.
All right. Yes. Well, there you go, Amber. You have something to look forward to. So that is an interesting turn of events that you're planning on self-publishing, because that's in the publishing industry. That's always kind of do I self-publish? Do I go with a traditional publisher? And there's advantages and disadvantages of both, and some people feel very strongly about one or the other. And I'm curious, what made you decide that versus going the traditional publishing route?
Well, I mean, it's a great question, and I have been sort of swimming around in this publishing now from the time I wrote a different novel before the Henrietta and Inspector Howard series. So I would say I've been doing this for about 10 years. And my goal always at the beginning was to be traditionally published. And then I wrote A Girl Like You thinking that I would use that to query agents, but already I had become a little bit sour on traditional publishing. And so I went directly to She Writes Press. It's like I wrote this story specifically to sell to an agent. And in the end, I didn't show it to a single agent. I'm like, I really want to be a part of She Writes Press. This is like the perfect thing for me. So I was with She Writes Press from 2016 on, and I've learned so much about the industry since then, and they're very transparent and they're very good at educating. So I have written 2 other standalones. They're historical women's fiction, and I have been querying those for the last couple of years. I've gotten a lot of agents who have read the full, who have said this is great writing. One agent said that my opening chapter was the best chapter she's ever read in her life. And yet they don't think that they can sell it. So I just feel like traditional publishing is narrowing. And you have a lot of people who are just, trying to do their job, and there's not a lot of room for risk. So traditional publishing is very risk averse. So it's very hard to sort of break in, even though I have agents saying, this is great writing, great story, but we can't sell it. So in the meantime, I'm going to conferences. I talk to all different authors of every different stripe, and I've become a little bit enamored of the self-published authors because they have so much freedom, and also because they seem like they are the ones who are making some actual money because they are able to so effectively advertise and market their books. So I just think that I'd like to try it and like to see if I can be successful at it. So I'd like to start with a brand new series, and start from scratch and just see where it goes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll be watching you.
Yeah, thanks.
So I know our time is winding down, but I wanted to give our audience members one last chance to come up on stage if they have any questions. And I see that Debbie has joined us. Hi, Debbie. Did you have a question or comment for Michelle?
Hello. Yes, I do. All of the above. Thank you, Michelle. It's so nice to listen to your story tonight and to hear the answers to the questions Amber's been asking. She's been doing a great job, and she covered some of the questions that I had too. But you really covered the main question I had, was who was going to play Clive on the big screen. So I know who Amber's love interest match is going to look like.
Harry Steil.
I'm always asking book clubs, like, who would you cast for these roles? It's so fun.
Well, I guess we should ask Amber who should be cast.
Please, yes, tell me.
I think Susan
so I can write it down.
Susan was pretty accurate. I would not be upset if Harry Styles made an appearance, but
maybe as the young Clive.
I love it.
Okay, so other questions I have a lot of questions actually, but one thing you said, maybe I misunderstood. You said it's harder to sell or market a book if you have a combination of genres versus like a straight up mystery or romance. Don't all books, really have a combination of genres if you really look at them, or pieces of each, or how can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a good, a good insight. I think that these are primarily billed as mystery. Okay, so that's fine, but they don't really follow a tight mystery formula. They don't follow a romance formula. So I'm just, writing a story, not necessarily a mystery. And there's many, many mystery series, as you all know, that really don't deal with it's usually like a man and woman protagonist who are like amateur sleuths, or he's a detective and she's the amateur sleuth or whatever, and there might be this sort of attraction between the two of them, but they never get together. And I think there's a lot of that in mystery, not where it's just like a full on, okay, let's get married. And then I didn't know what I was doing. I'm like, well, this sounds good. Yeah, I'll write this. Not realizing that, I'm really blowing, the formulas. So.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. So I read A Girl Like You. It's been a long time, and I loved it. And I totally agree with Amber that you really brought your readers into the to the place of the story, 1930s, in Chicago, and the whole scene was really well pictured out and written out for us. So I really appreciate that. But and I'm just going to be honest here. I am not a person that can stick with a book series because there's so many books to read. But I mean, I loved the book so much, but I haven't read all the books after it. So how do you draw readers into the middle of a series? Do you? I know you kind of talked about that early on in your conversation with Amber, but can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. So a lot of times, I usually book one is either free on different platforms or 99 cents. And it's kind of a way to lure people into at least giving the series a try. And I always try to end every book with a little bit of a cliffhanger. Not so much that you're disappointed or you're left unsatisfied, but it's enough where you really want to find out what is going to happen next. And I do that for each of the storylines so that you're doubly or triply hopefully invested in wanting to pick up the next book.
That makes sense. Thank you. I appreciate it. I have more questions, but I'll leave it at that for now so that Susan can finish with her conversation. But I'm really enjoying this, and thanks so much for writing and for taking the time with us tonight.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Debbie, for your questions and comments. And I know we're out of time, so unless there's any last minute requests to join on stage, we're going to have to close things out. And Amber, did you want to close the show out, or?
Yeah, I'll jump back on. The last thing I want to ask Michelle is, Michelle, where can fans find you? Anyone in the audience, social media that you often use? Any links?
Yeah, if you go to my website, michellecoxwrites.com, I have all of my links there. I'm primarily on Facebook and Instagram, but I am recently started a deep dive into TikTok. So I do 3 videos a day. Some of them I think are kind of funny. So you can find me there. And otherwise, you can find links to all of my books on my website. They're on all platforms, and they are also out in audio.
Perfect. I love that. And you can purchase the book right now by going to the middle of our screen. There's the fortune cookie icon, and you can click on that link, and it'll give you right to the link to purchase her book, A Spying Eye. And the last thing I want to mention about Michelle is she is a part of Novel Network, which means that, she can do book club talks. So if you are interested in book clubs or, you want to hear more from Michelle, I highly recommend reaching out to Adventures by the Book or Novel Network, and we can make that happen for you. So it's been so much fun chatting with you today, Michelle, and congratulations on this book, and congratulations on the 7th book, which is in the process of being created. So exciting. And remember that this is part 3 of a 5-part series. So we will be coming back for part 4 in 2 weeks. We're going to take a little bit of holiday break, and then we'll come back on November 30th on a Wednesday. So keep that in your mind, with novelist Eliza Knight, who will be joining us to discuss her novel, The Mayfair Bookshop. And if you want to hear more about Michelle, Susan, or me on Fireside, be sure to click on our icons, and you can follow us. So anytime we're on Fireside, a little notification will get popped up on your screen, and then you will be able to join our chats. And if you aren't familiar with Adventures by the Book, please visit our website and our YouTube channel. That's where we post all our old videos, so you can keep rewatching your favorite authors. And on top of that, we have 2 very exciting events that we just published and are promoting, which is Superbook. It's a live and in-person San Diego adventure with over 20 authors, so be sure to check that out. And then Pitch Fest was also just published, and so we're very excited to present that. It's a virtual event, so anyone can join, and that one is free. So head right over to the website and join quick. We really want to see you there. And I think we're good to go. So thank you again, Michelle, for everything, for your book and for answering all of our questions. And until next time, what is your next adventure by the book? Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Amber. Thank you, Susan. This was great. I really had fun.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thanks. Bye-bye.